Good afternoon. Welcome to RSA. Hope you had a good day so far. Everybody happy here? Yay! It's like we're happy too. It's like we're very excited to see such a full room. We were initially expecting maybe 5 or 10 people, so it's like this is great. It's like I'm really super happy. My name is Gerald Buchelt. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for Sprinklr. At Sprinklr, responsible for all of security across the entire enterprise, corporate IT, enterprise applications, our product. Sprinklr is a company. We do essentially, for lack of a better term, social media management. So we listen to all major social networks. We can do all kinds of other fancy things around that. Pull this into our platform. We do machine learning, AI, on top of those kind of social network messages, and then transform this to do allow our customers to do other things like advocacy. We have a service component, so there's a lot of things that you can do on top of the Sprinklr platform. Company was founded in 2009. We've been around for a while. We have a lot of large enterprise customers to whom security is super important. So it's like it's really one of those kind of key pillars that we really need to move forward as a business. I don't want to talk too much about the companies. Like this is not a sales call, so I promise to that. But we wanted to talk a little bit about what we're doing around risk management, compliance, and it's like essentially it's like how we try to better understand concerns that we as a security team, our customers, and our investors have. And for that, I have with me Sonal. Sonal, please introduce yourself.
Hi everyone. Can you guys hear me in the back? Okay, great. I'm usually a very low talker, so I'm glad. So I'm Sonal. I'm director of GRC. I work with Jerry, basically handling security GRC. And essentially what we'll be talking about today has been our research project for the last 6-7 months. So, great.
Absolutely. And we're having the usual kind of disclaimer. I'm sure you've seen the disclaimer before. Basically, Sprinklr does not take any responsibility. RSA does not take any responsibility. Whatever we say may or may not be true. So don't, like seriously, it's like, I mean, it's the usual kind of blah. So it's like from that perspective, don't make investment decisions or legal advice or whatever. It's like, just like, don't do this. It's like we're trying our best here, but it's like, we'll see how this goes. So with this, what is it really that we're talking about? So what we wanted to do is like we wanted to set out the stage a little bit for why we got to the kind of like thing that we're looking at. And what the problem is, enterprise risk management. So enterprise risk management is obviously super important. We're a public company. We need to do it for that. We do a whole slew of compliance-related things. Sonal is actually leading that, whether it's ISO, SOC 2, so we're doing some HIPAA work in the future. So there's a bunch of things that really require you to have a good understanding from a risk perspective. For myself, it's like I'm speaking with the board occasionally. It's like that's unavoidable. And they also want to know, hey, what's our risk exposure? It's like how does the company look like from that? And doing that is hard. It's like it's really, really, really hard because any kind of likelihood assessment for threats happening, any kind of risk assessment, is really very often extremely subjective, right? It's like I don't know whether any of you have been sitting in risk meetings. It's like many times, particularly for smaller companies or emerging companies like ours, it's a bunch of people who have been charged with risk management sit in a room. Does anybody know a risk? Yeah, you know a risk? Okay, great, let's put that down. It's like, do we have another one? Okay, fine, we're done. Right? It's like it's not really an effective kind of thing. It's like it's a compliance-related task. It does not really yield a lot of efforts. At the same time, from a CISO perspective, if I understand our risk posture well, then that can help me with all kinds of fancy things. Right? It's like we can go through what that really is. So the first assumption is like likelihood assessments are hard and subjective, and humans that don't tend to be very good at that. There's so many videos out there on the interwebs that show people doing stupid stuff. I think that really demonstrate that likelihood calculations are not very good. On the other side, it's like we have in a security program like we have at Sprinklr, we have a lot of data. It's like we have compliance assessment. We have a SOC 2 report, the whole control system around that. We have ISOs, anything against that. So we have a lot of different kind of like control assessments. We also have sensor data from our endpoint detection tools, from our cloud security posture management tools, and from all other kind of tools. So there's tons of data that describes in pretty good detail what it actually is that we're doing, right? It's like we just don't tap into this in a meaningful way for risk calculations. So, so we have that. It's like there's a problem. It's like doing risk calculations. We have a bucket full of information of controls that are available that we already know about. And we have on the other side a really great dictionary for threats that are being observed. So people familiar with MITRE ATT&CK framework? Show of hands. Ah, awesome. It's like, that makes it a lot easier. So it's like, it's like if you think about the attack framework, it's really a dictionary of techniques and sub-techniques that describe what is actually being observed in the real world, right? Okay, so what we were thinking, It's like we were thinking essentially, it's like we got the control frameworks, we know how the threats actually look like, and part of the enterprise framework, if you look at it, is also the countermeasures. So it's like there are known countermeasures. And what are countermeasures? The security controls, right? And it's like, oh my God, it's like suddenly things starting to come together. Because at the end of the day, it's like if you can start at the control systems that we have, that we know, and the sensor data that we know, map that back to the countermeasures that are well documented in the attack framework, you will learn a lot about, in the end, what kind of techniques an adversary can successfully or not successfully use, right? If we have a lot of controls across all of our assets around, say, multi-factor authentication, it makes it a lot harder to do certain kind of things on the authentication side. And it's like that really eliminates a bunch of techniques in the MITRE framework that are no longer really accessible to an adversary as they execute that. That was how we started this. And once we started to figure out as well, we got all this kind of information, the only thing we really need to do is take the control assessments, map them back, and then we know essentially what the likelihood is. Because then you can really start building kill chains from the attack frameworks that are more or less likely to execute, right? You can then map that back to actually known APTs. There are plenty of APT evaluations. I'm sure you've heard of them. So it's like if you look at existing APTs, we know what kind of techniques they typically use. You can essentially overlay that over your own assessment of how effective you mitigate techniques, and then really know it's like how well you're prepared for that, depending on what APTs you're worried about. And lastly, for me as a CISO, it's like when I look at my budget, it really helps me also in budget decisions, because it's like if I start to know what areas are kind of red and problematic from a technique, then I really want to start simulating controls that are mitigating those specific kind of areas that are problematic. So there's a whole slew of things that you can do on top of that. And that's where we started, I would say, yeah, it's like roughly a year ago, 3/4 of a year ago, and then built this out essentially on top of Excel spreadsheets. And it's like we were trying to integrate this a little bit with our compliance system, and have been moving forward. And it's been a journey. It's definitely not done. So don't expect like you can come up to us afterwards and buy that as a product. So, sorry. But it's definitely something that we also been starting to see across the industry as well. All right, do you want to take this, or do you want me to take this?
Take this. And
I take this, fine.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, that's right. Next slide is definitely you. So scope determination. It's like one thing that was really, really super important to us was that it's like if you start to look at performing such a kind of thing, if you start at control assessments, you really have to understand what those kind of controls apply to, right? So it's like, I don't know, it's like if any, people ever here have done like control assessments internally, standard questionnaire-based ones or so, do you use MFA? Yes or no? It's like, you know, it's like, yeah, in some places yes, in some places no, right? So it's like reality is usually a little bit more complicated than yes or no or some controls. So the way to address this is like we really wanted to make sure that we fully understand the boundaries of what we're assessing. So taking a look at Sprinklr. We have corporate IT systems, so that's our back office, it's the laptops, it's the directory infrastructure, it's like single sign-on, all those kind of things, and the associated enterprise application, the usual stuff, Salesforce, NetSuite, and the other things. So it's like that's definitely one set of asset classes. It's like we have our our product environment. It's like that is the core production infrastructure that we deliver our services to our customers. We have QA environment, we have dev environments, we have the other kind of test environments, modeling environments for building machine learning models, et cetera. So it's like all of those kind of things have different kind of requirements and control sets around them. So the first thing that we really wanted to make sure is that we define the core system boundaries, right? So it's like we look at production systems only today. We look at laptops and directory services only today, et cetera, et cetera. So that's really the first step so that we can actually go back to a reasonable amount of saying yes or no. It's like, yes, we use MFA for single sign-on. No, we don't use single sign-on for developer environments because who cares about them, right? So it's like there's really, that's the first kind of step. Authentication and identity and access management turned out to be really important because as a company, it's like we don't own servers. Mostly, it's like there are 4 servers that I still need to kill, but it's like those are the last 4, I promise. But it's like we don't own servers. Everything is either SaaS or on top of IaaS platforms. So from that perspective, authentication really becomes much more important to us than traditional kind of network security because our offices are basically glorified Starbucks, right? So it's like you have a Wi-Fi and that's kind of like it, and it looks nice, reasonably. So once we understand the kind of scope of the assessment, we really have to then also look at the architecture and implementation of what is actually happening. Are those kind of systems interactive? So it's like I said, a lot of users logging in, like into laptops. Are those kind of like systems that only tech ops or IT ops or administrators are logging in? Are we talking about on-premise environment? Yeah, we're not. But it's like what kind of cloud environments are we looking at? What kind of delivery platforms are we looking at? And then finally, it's like, I think this seems to be really the theme of this show. It's like, at least from some of the things that I was talking about, sub-processors, supply chain, it's like, how do those play into this as well? You should really fully understand all data flows and all paths as you look at your control assessments. And that's, like I said in the beginning, that's where we start. We start with the control assessments so that we already have a catalog of the countermeasures that we can apply. Now, what kind of control assessments do we have, Sonal?
So I'm sure everyone or anyone working for any company performs control assessments on an annual basis, sometimes 2 times a year, and then there's so many assessments happening at the same time and multiple times. So at Sprinklr, we have SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3, PCI, SOX. We're a public company, and ISO as well. So what we essentially started off with was once we determined the scope, we looked to see what control assessments we had done for that specific scope. So SOX only applies to your back office systems, for example. It doesn't apply to your product environment, maybe not. And then ISO may apply to your production environment. So you want to look at essentially figuring out your scope, like Jerry was mentioning, and then looking at all the control assessments you've done against that scope. And then what we did was we took the NIST 800 controls, the NIST 853 controls, and we looked to see which of these control assessments for that scope mapped against the NIST 853 controls. So maybe not, NIST 853 has tons of controls, so not every ISO control or SOC or anything you've done may cover that. And so anything that's a delta, then we did our own separate assessment internally. And so as a result of that, we then did a whole analysis of those specific controls. And so we broke them down into, our results were broken down into 3 categories. So it wasn't anything like it wasn't a fully quantitative or just a fully subjective assessment. It was sort of in the middle. So we broke it down into high, which is green, moderate, which is yellow, and then low, which is red. So the high basically means that when I did my control assessment for a specific control, say pen testing, and if I felt that, across my scope, we have a fairly good coverage. We are pen testing against the entire scope. We are getting the results, and then we're remediating those issues on time. So it's meeting the idea of the control. So we said, okay, we're going to mark that control as high coverage, or we're going to make that green. Moderate was more around the idea we haven't implemented this control across our entire environment. Maybe we have 80% coverage, 70% you make a determination, and you know what, we keep getting failures. We're not really mature in this control, so we mark those as moderate coverage, so a yellow. And then a low, which is the red, essentially meant that we don't have this control. You know what, we only have one environment where we have implemented this control, so we're not comfortable calling this high coverage or moderate coverage. So it could be, there's a control in the NIST framework around threat hunting. And so, if you don't have a threat hunting program, you're just sort of winging it. So, you would mark that as low. And, it is semi-quantitative. And we would look at it across our multiple systems within the scope. Like Jerry was saying, you may not have MFA across the entire scope of systems. Maybe it's just a few. Then that's where your coverage comes into play.
Absolutely. So now what we end up with is like essentially a set of 853 controls. Obviously not all of them, not all 900. It's like that's kind of like a little bit excessive. But it's like we looked really at which ones are relevant in the context of what we're doing for our business, right? So scope that down a little bit. It's like it came to a conclusion in terms of like, okay, it's like now we know how well each of those controls are implemented across our environment. Standard control assessment. That's no magic really at all. But what we ran into is like, and that really was one of the things that prompted us doing this, was MITRE Ingenuity is like actually published a mapping between the 853 controls, and that's why we're always talking about the 853 controls, back to the techniques. So it's like they did the hard work, the lifting in terms of like making sure that there's a good mapping between the controls that the 853 controls that we have through the published countermeasures, and they have on their website. It's like we stole the graphics there at the bottom. It's like they have this kind of mapping process documented, where they go essentially back from the controls to the countermeasures in the enterprise framework, and then ultimately back to the techniques. So it's like based on that, it's like if you have control X, Y, and Z, that mitigates through being a countermeasure for technique or sub-technique ABC, the following kind of thing. Very straightforward. It's like this is literally not rocket science. We're really just standing here a little bit on the shoulders of giants. And the idea is like that is a standardized kind of a framework that really works well for us, because we can now essentially load this either in the Excel spreadsheet that you see right now, or it's like as we're doing it in the near future, it's like we're going through our compliance system, which is then GRC. So it's like in order to automate as much of that as possible. But it's like it essentially rests on that kind of like mapping process that is outlined there at the bottom, that allows you effectively to go back and forth between where we have what kind of controls we have, and it's like the techniques that come out of it. Once we built that, it's like Sonal went into Excel.
So yes, we went into Excel, and what you see on the left hand, it's hard to read, but we literally just took that Ingenuity mapping of the NIST controls to the techniques. We took the unique NIST 800 controls, and then, as I mentioned before, high, moderate, low coverage. We determined, okay, is that control a high coverage, moderate, or a low coverage? And then to the right is that actual mapping that Ingenuity has provided. And you can basically sort it, and we'll do a little demo of this too. But you can basically sort it by control, and then it's a many-to-many mapping. So on the left, on the top right-hand side is looking at all the controls that is one specific control mapping to several techniques. And then at the bottom, you can just filter for a technique and see all the different controls that map to that technique. And then you can, based on all the results you have on the left, you'll see either for that technique, you're going to maybe see reds, yellows, greens, or a bunch of greens, or all yellow. So it depends on where you come out in your assessment as to the coverage for that control. But then what do you do with a whole lot of red, yellow, greens? And that's where we actually had to churn and think quite a bit, and really depends on your tolerance for how much you want to take on as a risk. But you can either go with an average. You can say, okay, you know what, I'm just going to take an average across my red, yellow, green, and then most of the time you end up in a yellow range, unless it's all green. So you can do an average, or you can do a watermark. You can say, okay, I'm going to go with the best case scenario or the worst case. And the worst case being like if I have at least one red in there, I'm going to mark that technique red. Or you could even weight it. You can think a little harder. You can maybe weight these even more. But we didn't go all the way there.
So and it's like, let's give you an example. It's like going back to the MFA stuff that I was talking before. So if you think about our production environment, well, production environment for us is fairly complicated, right? It's like we're sitting on top of a public cloud provider. So there's IAM access, there's actually low-level system access into our respective loads that are running there. It's like into the Kubernetes nodes. There's more stuff on top of that. But there's also application-level access for our administrators managing the system at the top. Now think about it. It's like, and everything is also behind VPN for low-level access, right? So we have VPN, we have access through the Bastion host, we have access to AWS, and we have access to the administrative interface to the application itself. So that's four authentication types that are actually happening. Now it's like, I was coming back to what I was saying earlier. It's like, do you have MFA? Yes or no? Well, again, it's like even if you start to break down your asset classes a little bit, it depends, right? It's like in this case, it's like we have it across the board because, well, it's like that's what we feel is important. But it's like you could definitely see a scenario where this would not be the case, right? Where we say it's like, okay, we have this for all the low-level stuff, but for the administrative interface, because it's consumer-facing and for some reason the consumers don't want it, it's like we don't do MFA, right? So now the question really becomes is like as you do the control assessments across those different kind of systems, how do you combine them in a meaningful way? And that's really what Sonal was talking about. Do we say is like if everything is green, the entire control is green, and then the technique is fully mitigated, or only as soon as one of them is yellow or red, it automatically drops down to the lowest watermark. It's like because it's like it kind of like doesn't really work otherwise. Or is it okay to say, well, we got two greens and one red, so it's kind of 2/3, so that's ultimately a yellow somewhere in the middle. That really depends a little bit on how you want to run this. We haven't found a good solution for this. So I want to be super honest about that. It's like I think the right way to do this is to really evaluate this individually for every single control. But that is a lot of work, and it's like we have to do some other stuff on the side as well. So didn't really have time in this kind of like research effort that we've been going through to do this fully. But it's like as we move forward, we will be implementing this on top of an automated platform, so on top of our GSC platform, and then really put the right kind of weightings in order to make sure, yeah, it's like in this control, it's like it's all or nothing. It's like you either have it or you don't. In this control, is that at least one is there. It's like we're good. It's like that's definitely a scenario as well. Or we may want to say it's like, well, it's like it really should be averaged across what is there. And those kind of decisions are definitely what you need to do. So once you're done with that, it's like you really end up being in a situation where you can actually start to put Christmas tree lights on the framework, right? So you see green, yellow, and red across the entirety of that framework. And you start to see, even looking at this from a visualization perspective, you already start to see, well, it's like we have certain areas where we have higher kind of risk exposure, and end up being in a situation where we may be susceptible. It's like you can, at that point in time, then also build essentially kill chains that would walk you, that would essentially walk through the framework, and particularly exploiting those kind of like areas that are not well covered. So at the end of the day, it's like once you build that kind of kill chain, you start from reconnaissance through establishing initial foothold, getting into exploitation, and then ultimately extraction, or whatever the ultimate goal is. Oops. Then you can assign a likelihood to every single one of these kind of kill chains, see how likely they are, and then understand it's like what kind of risk rating you actually want to apply to that. And that is really where it ties all back to the risk management, because one of the questions that I'm getting from the board and from our senior leadership is how likely is it that that we have ransomware event? How likely is it that we're going to be attacked by some cyber criminals that are known to be operating out of North Korea and stealing money, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like this really helps us to better assess that likelihood, not necessarily being able to give like a fully quantitative, well, it's a 10 or like 7.8% probability that we're going to be hit within the next year or so, but definitely being able to better assess is like which kind of like kill chains are more plausible and which ones are less plausible, and as such like do that. You can then really map this then ultimately to APTs. It's like if you go back, there have been assessments for Turla in 2023. There are many other assessments for other APTs as well. See what kind of techniques they typically use, and then essentially overlay this over your own kind of framework. So it's like if they use X, Y, or Z techniques, and you have those covered in green or at least in yellow, you're much less likely to be successfully attacked by that particular threat actor than, for example, if their typical approach includes techniques that on which you're weak. So it really allows you to have a readiness assessment in terms of like how your exposure would look like. And then lastly, again, it's like what I was saying earlier. You can do an investment analysis. If you think about the coloring of the framework that we had before, it's like, from my perspective, it's like if I need to make a budget decision for next year, it's like which kind of project do I want to support? Sadly, I don't have infinite money. Would be great, but it's not the reality. So it's like I really have to make sure that I can weigh the various kind of like investment proposals that are coming from the team in terms of like how much benefit do I get from that. If I have a tool like this, it really allows me to go back, assess effectively what if we add additional set of controls, say we invest in a new single sign-on solution that is more advanced or has like risk-based kind of like authentication, what does that ultimately mean from the ability to mitigate certain types of risks? That is really where the value is, because I can then play around essentially, it's like punch in a couple of changes for the kind of control assessments that we would get if we were to invest in one of those kind of proposals. See what happens to the Christmas tree in the framework, and if many things turn green, I'm going like, yay, this is really good. It's like I really want to invest in this. And if there's no significant change, I just go like, well, maybe we should rather invest into something else. So it's a really good kind of like tool that ultimately allows us to better understand what is happening and then use that as a decision matrix for making budget decisions as well. Now, we go to the demo, which will hopefully work. Because we need Wi-Fi, so please turn off all your Wi-Fi right now. It's like we need the bandwidth. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
All right.
So.
It's working. So this is essentially, I'm just going to walk through how this flows, this thought process. So as we were talking about earlier, we did our control assessment. We have comments on the side to support it because at least us, we would forget. Why did we mark that moderate? Like a week later. So we had to make comments on the side, but essentially you can see that it's high, moderate, low, and then there were certain controls where you may say, you know what, this doesn't apply to us. Wi-Fi, like Jerry mentioned, doesn't apply to us because we are all remote, or we don't have to worry about physical controls.
We don't have Wi-Fi in AWS. Can't do it.
And then once you have this assessment done, then in the next tab, essentially this is the dump from MITRE Ingenuity. So where this basically using conditional formatting, if we have AC10 as moderate, it's showing up as moderate or yellow over here. And so you can filter by control.
Can you make this a little bit bigger? It's like,
Yeah.
Is that possible? Because I wouldn't be able to read it. There you go.
Is that better?
A little bit, yep.
All right. So you can filter by control, and you can see all the techniques that this applies to. Or you can filter by technique. Let's pick any one. And then you can see that, okay, this specific technique has all these controls associated with it. And you know what, I have one control here that's not working well, and so that's where I need to, and then this is where we had to think about, okay, what are we going to do with all these colors? And so we experimented with the majority technique, essentially saying, you know what, if majority of our controls are under high coverage, we're going to just mark it as green. If majority of them are low coverage, we're going to mark them as red, and vice versa. Or then we did the watermark technique, where you can see it actually looks very different. We went with the worst case. So if we had any low coverage at all, then we would just make it red. If our worst case coverage was a high, then you can see here we marked it as green. And then this translates then into the matrix, which you can download from MITRE, and it essentially will show you the colors based on what you assessed in your technique assessment. And so, for instance, if I change, say, CM6, it's low coverage.
What is CM6 again?
Configuration settings.
Mm-hmm.
So if your configuration settings, which is quite an important control, if you change that to a high coverage, you do notice a lot of these these on the side actually became green. So like what Jerry was talking about earlier was, then you can start seeing how, based on which controls you, based on the adjustments to the controls, then you can see, okay, how is that affecting your framework, your overlay. So another example is access management. We have AC, access enforcement. If I make this low coverage, it turns red, and then your matrix on this side, it starts becoming more red than it was before.
So as you see, it's like this is really starting to become a tool where you can start to model in terms of like what happens if I improve or remove kind of like coverage. In the case of configuration management, for example, it's like we definitely had some issues in terms of like consistency across certain parts of the environment. It's like were they all configured to CIS baselines? It's like, well, they were not. It's like some were, some weren't. So we decided that that's actually ultimately a low coverage, because if you think about the scenario, if you have configuration management for some of your systems, but not for all of them that should have it, then you're still exposed. It's like the adversary just needs to find the right kind of systems to break into, and then ultimately comes back at effectively being exploiting those kind of systems. It may take a little bit longer, so it's like over a timeline, it's like you would be, it's like it would take longer to be exposed. But if you look over the course of a year or so, it's like the chances of that happening would be much higher versus like if you had a consistent configuration management across the entire fleet, right? So this is a practical scenario where some of those kind of things actually ultimately worked out for us. And we started doing this. It's like I was describing before. The goal here really is to load this into the GRC tooling that we have today, and then make sure that we can really look at this across the board. All right, you want to go back there?
Yep.
You want to take that, or?
Essentially what this is saying is they're just like MITRE and Genuity, they have the MITRE attack to the NIST 800 controls mapping. There is also the CIS community defense model. They have the same thing against the CIS safeguards. So you could pick and choose, you could do both. We did run into this after we went through the NIST mapping, so that is another option.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like we're also been, interestingly enough, talking to some startups. One of them is Vina Security. It's like they actually started to build out a very similar kind of approach where they actually, I was talking initially about the sensor data. So far we've been really talking about the control assessments, right? Which are very convenient because they're already here. It's like we have them now, it's like we need to use them anyways. So it's like just mapping them back is like really not that hard. What we've been talking to Vina is like they actually do the other side where they read sensor data. So they integrate with, say, something like an endpoint protection tool like CrowdStrike or so, read out the actual configurations for each of the assets you have in there. It's like map that back to the countermeasures that are applicable in the framework, and then ultimately give you with a reading in terms of like what attack techniques are mitigated or not. So between reading actual sensor data from the systems through APIs and looking at control assessments, which are not as granular as those kind of like automated systems, but which have the big advantage of being able to cover organizational, procedural, administrative kind of controls, you can really start to build a fairly comprehensive view in terms of like how your organization is ultimately set up from that perspective. Add this with the CIS framework, and you end up really, the community defense model here, and you really can start to get a much better sense in terms of like what kind of attacks are likely, what kind of attack vectors or techniques would be more likely to be successful in your environment versus those that you already have covered. Because the worst thing you want to do is like spend the little money that you have from a security budget. It's always little. It's like that's just reality. It's like spent this on something that you already got covered, right? It's like that. It's like, hey, it's like I really need to protect new stuff instead of like old stuff. So, Sonal, what do we do from here?
Yep. So, if you are interested, what you would do is essentially go back to all the assessments you've done. Look at your inventory of controls that you have assessed against. It could be through your current assessments. It could be through your quarterly assessments. So we also do internal quarterly assessments, and then map those results to the NIST 800 controls or any other. If you want to try the CIS one, that's there too. And then using the semi-quantitative analysis, then figuring out the mapping. So this takes about 3 months to just finish the analysis. And maybe do additional analysis. And then after that, looking at the results and playing with, because once you come out with your high, moderate, low, then it comes down to, okay, what is going to be my end? Do I want it to be based on a specific statistical method, or should I do it based on a weight, or should I base it on high, low watermark? So you determine that, and then identify your kill chains, and figure out your investment based on your risk.
And once you're done with that, it's like just get back to us because I want to compare notes, please. All right, this kind of concludes the main event. It's like we would love to open this up for question and answers. It's like please, it's like step to the microphones, and if you could step to the microphones there, please, or is that, I don't know. It's like how's that work? Both sides, perfect.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. It was good. So quick question, what if you have controls that you can't map to MITRE?
Sorry?
What if you have controls that you can't map to MITRE?
Well, it's like, I mean, what we do is like we map against NIST 853, right? 853 is a very comprehensive framework of controls. It's a total, I think, in V5 has 900 different controls. I would make the case that your controls are covered. And it's like that is really the baseline, what gets mapped back to the techniques. So if there's something that you don't have, then let us know. But
yeah, and then you would do your own assessment where you don't have those controls.
Okay.
Yeah,
right.
That's what we do.
And how do you identify the kill chains, the connections? Like once you have the reds identified?
We don't have a good way of doing that, but it's like let's talk afterwards. Sorry.
Hi, Sylvain. As an AI specialist, why didn't you try to use AI for doing this Excel nightmare instead of doing manually? I mean, as an AI specialist, you should use this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, it's like if I had our entire engineering department behind us, it's like I would do this. We started out looking first at the process. So it's like what you see here is not necessarily the final product that we ultimately want to create. It's like we really wanted to have a good proof of concept that shows us it's like this is a valid approach. But I agree with you. It's like I think the next step would be really to apply some machine learning models and some basic AI capabilities to go one step deeper and understand is like how much of that can be automated. So we're looking at automation platforms. It's definitely part of the thing. Thank you. Sir.
Have you validated your mappings to semi-annual pen tests to see if there's any correlation between them. So, for instance, based on where you saw you had coverage for or minimal coverage for, have you ran pen tests against each of those controls to see if that is actually the case?
So we have not specifically, it's like not specifically taken the results of this and then run a pen test specifically against that target. But we have definitely seen, it's like if we had a weakness in configuration management, sometimes found through pen tests or sometimes found through other kind of like security assessments that we're doing, that definitely map back. So it's like there's definitely some good correlation there.
Absolutely. And then does this methodology kind of align to what much more of the industry is moving toward, which is a threat-informed defense, where they're posturing their organization toward threats that would likely attack them?
I think it lends it. I think it's complementary to that. Really, it's like we're not talking about we're not analyzing threat actor behavior here, right? It's like we're really looking at the defensive posture of the environment. So from that perspective, it's like we're not so interested in what would threat actor XYZ or which threat actor would likely attack us, which is I think what you're going after. But it's like we're more as like once that information is available, we can then assess how likely it is that particular kind of threat would be realized given the kind of controls that we put in place.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
So when you're mapping the TTPs to the countermeasures, do you treat all countermeasures as equal, or did you weight them to say this one actually provides like higher protection from this TTP than this other one, so that then that would feed into your then determination when you started to calculate how many gave you, low confidence, medium, or high confidence?
So we, when we were doing our assessment, it depended on the methodology. So if we were using the watermark or the majority control, so it really, the results actually changed quite a bit. So it's, that's the part that we haven't researched deeper yet, because I think that's where we need to go next, is go deeper and get a little more mature with that.
Individual control.
To figure out, okay, that specific control, do we want to weight that higher? Maybe there's certain controls that are just not that important, or may not apply to your environment. So that's the next piece that we have to work on.
Cool,
Yeah.
thank you.
So the importance of control, so how did you determine what baseline you were going to protect the data at, right? Because you got to do your low, moderate, or high. If it's 199 to determine your baseline, what are you collecting, processing, storing, and then you protect based on that. You just been talking about how many controls you would have to implement, but you didn't talk about what the categorization of the system was to determine the baseline so that you know how to protect the data.
Fair questions. Like the baseline that we started out with was basically centered around the existing controls that we found. It's like we're evaluating as 2701, evaluating SOC 1 and 2. It's like in terms of the control systems that are required around that. We're looking at PCI. So it's like we're really starting off this kind of like entire exercise with a catalog of what we had, right? What we knew we had. It's like in there, it's like if you do an assessment, it's like in ISO, you do get a good understanding about what controls are properly implemented and which ones are where they're OFIs or other things.
I don't mean necessarily implemented or not, but you collect, process, store, transmit data, and you have to categorize that data so you know at what level to protect that data. And so that's my question is at what level are you protecting the data? That's how you determine what controls to implement.
So from that perspective, we're fairly the majority of the data that we have to protect has not a very high level of. It's like the PII we actually do collect is PII that is pre-published. So it's like you have to obviously look by geography a little bit in terms of like by collecting, do we turn this into something that has to be protected or not? But there's the majority of the data that we are processing is public data. Let's put it like that. Does that help? Hey, a little. Yep. Absolutely. But it's like I would agree. It's like in terms of like how you scope your systems. Like if you have particular systems that are processing extremely sensitive data, you want to put a different baseline on there. It's like I agree with that. Well, thank you, everyone. It was really a pleasure having you here. It's like thank you.